Hi there. I wanted to get on and tell you about Project Toph, which is the game I've been developing for the last year to 2 years. We're going to discuss what it is, a couple of the core systems behind it, like how it all works, some UX testing I conducted and what I found from that, a little snippet of gameplay, and finally the future plans for this project. So, first of all, Project Toph is a horror game where the protagonist is quote unquote blind. Uh, so are all of the enemies in the world, where the players and enemies both use echolocation. For the players, it's by making noise into their microphone or interacting with the world or using items and such, while scavenging for supplies and exploring this post apocalyptic world while avoiding the monsters that are also roaming the surface. You'll see a little bit of this in the gameplay snippet, but there's little bits of lore which are contained on these cassette tapes that you find while exploring. And after you collect them, you can listen to them at your safe house to learn a bit of the lore about the world or that level specifically. I also took a design decision from Amnesia, which is another horror game that intentionally doesn't give the players any weapons or means of fighting back. And what I learned from that is that it really heightens the fear because if players can just kill the enemies, they'll eventually get good enough at it where they aren't frightening anymore. Here's a bit of gameplay. I'm going to be skipping around a little bit and talking over it. You might hear some popping. That's me making noise into my microphone, which you'll notice illuminates the surroundings. Here I'm choosing a contract, where each mission is a contract that you are given, which takes you to a different map with different objectives. So right now we're in the safe house, and we're using the bike to now travel to that location. Now this map is a cabin map, and this first run is actually a failed attempt. So I died before I could finish it. And the goal of this contract, which I didn't show it off, but there's a system of keeping track of it. Uh, the goal of the contract is to collect this locket somebody lost, and then escape with it. Here's one of those cassette tapes I was mentioning, and I'm also collecting these items. You can see I'm now holding this mug, which you'll be able to throw and it'll shatter and distract enemies. A lot of the objects in the environment are interactable, so you can open these desk drawers right here, like I do. Also, if I were to go back to the bathroom, you could turn on the sink, and all of these ones that make noise light up the surroundings. There's an issue with the doors right now, which I'm still figuring out why they're not lighting up. So there, I just picked up a key. Each map has doors, obviously, but some of them are locked. Here's the first enemy, which is patrolling the basement. And that's a series of bottles hanging from a rope. So both players and enemies can hit that, and if a player hits one, it will draw the enemy to their position, as will making noise into the microphone, hence why I'm not making any noise. So here I'm gonna wait because I think it might be on this desk. And I was wrong, and before I have time to run, I get cornered and die. So now I'm back at the safe house. I'm going to go pick up the same contract. And this time around, I can show you a bit more of the map. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Here I am continuing to explore the cabin. Here's a bit more of the basement. And then I'm going to go out the back door out to this shed in the corner. So once again, I'm looking for a locket. I don't find it here, but I do find another cassette tape. And now finally, I'm going to go to this barn. And along the way, I'm going to pick up a key and another cassette tape. A lot of these locations are partially randomized. So if we go back just a second, you can see right over here, it's kind of fuzzy because of the recording, there's a generator, which will eventually, it also spawns a gas can somewhere around the map, which you can use to power it, and then it'll activate some stuff. So over here, I find the locket, and I decide to explore a little bit more to see if there's any more of those randomized objects, but I can't find them through the rest of the run. So I'm going to skip ahead to the end, where we run back to the bike that we got here on, put the locket in the bike, leave, and the mission is a success. Now I want to go over a couple of the core systems behind it. So the first is the actual echolocation, and it can be started from several different sources. The player's microphone, eventually there will be footsteps in the game that can make it, if you're, running or something. You can also opening doors, breaking objects, starting generators, and then enemies and the environment can make sounds. So I think at one point in there was a clock on the wall that was ticking, and that was lighting up the environment. Also water. Each sink has a chance to drip water, and so on. Then each source is given a tag and a priority. So if it's from the player, it's given a player tag. If it's given from a player interacting with the environment, it's given an environment tag with a moderate priority. The player has a high priority. And if it's the enemy or just the environment by itself, it's given the enemy or ambient tag and a low priority. Next, if it has the player or environment tag, it sends a message to the enemy's AI state controller. If they're close enough to hear it and it has a high enough sound priority, it will go to the investigate state. Something to note is that since each sound is given a different priority, the enemy will only if the enemy is already investigating a sound, it'll only investigate more suspicious sounds. Then finally, we actually simulate the echolocation, which is just using a light source at the sound's origin. Then, based on how loud the sound is, it will have a different intensity and range. And then, if there's something between the sound and the player, I have a script to add a couple effects to add reverb and muffle it to give it that illusion of being on the other side of a wall. Next is enemy AI. So we have 5 states here. Each gray arrow just progresses automatically when it's complete or after a couple seconds. Blue is when it hears a suspicious noise, where the priority from this echolocation system is higher than its current investigation priority. Yellow is if it quote unquote sees the player, and red is if it touches the player. So when we start, we get a random patrol path around the map, which are made of various points of interest, and we teleport the enemy to start at one of these points randomly. Then they go to the idle state, which just waits in place, and that state automatically goes to the patrol state, where we use this patrol path that we got assigned on start, and it will choose a random one and move to it. And then at any time during idle or patrol, if it hears a suspicious sound, it'll go to the investigate state, where it'll go to the sound's location and investigate the area. If any of these states saw the player, it'll go to the chase state. This, so to speak, ignores the echolocation mechanic and just chases the player for a couple seconds directly, regardless of where they are. So the only times we're going into this state is when the player is close to the enemy, and we want to have those couple seconds of fear in the player where they're frantically running or trying to hide. Finally, the attack state is started when the player touches the enemy, and it just plays an animation and kills the player. And when that's done, the enemy goes back to idle. If any time during the chase or investigate state it doesn't see the player or touch them, it'll go back to idle, which then repeats that sort of idle patrol rhythm. Next up, I want to talk about some of the UX testing I conducted. So I had 5 players play it, and after each, they were asked to take a survey. This had 2 demographic questions. First was age and gender identity. I wanted to see if there's any sort of relation between if certain ages found it more frightening, or if the game for some reason was more frightening or enjoyable to one particular gender identity. Next, I had 3 Likert questions, which were all ranked from strongly disagree to strongly agree. First was the game was frightening, then contract progress was easy to track, and finally, the enemies behaved realistically. Then finally, I asked them one open-ended question, which was just, what was the scariest or most memorable moment of your playing? At the end of each run, when the player returns to the safe house, it creates a file which records all of the information about that run, such as map name, how long the run was, the difficulty they selected, the contracts they selected, and how it turned out. These are all unique files, so there will be one file for each run. But each one is only about 250 bytes, so we don't have to really worry about it taking up a huge amount of storage on the player's computer. So I found that there were no trends among the responses that related to the demographic information. Thankfully, 100% of the participants found the game frightening, which tells me I'm on the right path. The contract progress tracker needs some work, as only 40% of participants found it easy to track. The remaining 60% were neutral, which isn't a negative, but I would like that to be higher so players have an easy time navigating these contracts. And finally, I found that enemy AI definitely needs some work, as only about 40% of players found the behavior realistic. And something that surprised me about that is that with the open-ended question, most people spoke about a experience with an enemy as their most memorable experience. Now, from the files created, we found out that each player did an average of 1.8 runs. The mean run duration was 190 seconds. There were some it was quite a wide range. Some were, 600 seconds, some were 30 seconds. 66% of runs were done on the cabin map, which is the one I showed in the gameplay. The average difficulty, excluding outliers, was 1.83, which tells me people generally selected a low difficulty, which isn't surprising considering most of the people who played this, it was their first time playing it. You'll note that I said barring outliers was 1.83 because one of the participants did 3 runs, all with max difficulty, which brings that average back up to about 2.3 or 2.4 if I remember correctly. And then 2/3 of all runs were the type find item, which is the one showed in the gameplay where the the player needs to find a specific object and get out with it. And then 2/3 ended with the participant quitting, but this figure is likely inaccurate as the build the testing was conducted on was quite buggy. Now, I just want to take a minute to discuss future plans. So, something I've had in the back of my mind and that the UX testing reinforced is that things like echolocation, enemy UI, enemy AI, the UI, and the economy and missions need to be improved. Some things that would certainly be nice to have that I think would improve the game would be things like controller support, a VR mode, and multiplayer. I know those last two are both a lot of work, but that will be definitely a stretch goal. And then a couple things I want to add before launch are just more of everything, more maps, items, enemies, traps, mission types, etc. Audio, obviously this is a game that centers heavily on audio, and right now there aren't many sound effects in the game. I also want more accessibility options, like a dyslexia-friendly font option and closed captions with a little arrow that points to the origin of the sound so that players that are hard of hearing or deaf can enjoy the game. I would also like controller support, better audio spatialization to simulate how audio travels, more of those cassette tapes to explain the world building, some creepy ambient noises like children laughing in the distance and such, and then a more in-depth system to customize difficulty. And that's it. Thank you for watching. I'm very passionate about this game, and I'm very excited to see where it takes me.